Hi, welcome again, welcome back. So let's get started. This time around, our video is going to be called, or it's going to be on gestures and how gestures are used throughout developmental stages. For example, we're going to see how infants use gestures, how toddlers use gestures, how gestures are used in preschool age children, and how school age children use gestures. So, without further ado, let's get started with gestures and development. So, I want to talk about that. Okay, let's begin. First, I want to talk about that gestures aren't language isn't something that we're born with automatically doing it. We are, yes, we do have the capability to learn it, but we do not talk about it. We don't come out talking. Let's put it that way. So, let's put it since because of that, we as infants we rely heavily on gestures, and the first gestures that I want to talk about is that reflexual. They're not they're not the gestures that we can use that we can control. No, our first gestures that we come out doing are based on reflexes, and so, for example, within the first month of our lives, we tend to turn to our direction to whatever we tend to turn our directions to loud noises. So whether we left or right, we just reflect. So we just turn towards it. Another type of gestures that we use unconsciously is we tend to open and close our hands whenever something is placed in them. So you close, you clench to whatever item someone puts in your hand. So that's the examples of just flexual gestures. However, as we develop, as we grow within the next couple months, our fine motor skills tend to get better. We tend to combine these initial reflex based gestures that we were born with. So after 12 months or so, we start to use our gestures. We actually start using our gestures in the manner that we see fit, and our reflexual gestures start to go down, start to go away. Thus, we start actually using these gestures as our own means of communication. For example, a study has found that one of the initial gestures that we use are called showing off gestures. This means that infants repeat the same behaviors because it attracts their caregiver's attention, such as when infants clap their hands repeatedly, and because that's what their moms are responding to. It is around this same similar time that we start using our showing off gestures, that we start actually beginning to express other types of pre-linguistic gestures such as deictic, ritualized requests, and iconic gestures, to name a few. These types of gestures are considered pre-linguistic because they emerge before the acquisition of language. So they come before language, but however, these same gestures are used to facilitate language acquisition. The first I want to talk about is deictic gestures. At root, it's pointing behavior. Infants use pointing to bring attention to objects that caught their attention, and they also use the deictic gestures to actually express what they want. For example, an infant could be pointing at a red cup that's in the counter, and as long as the mom catches the attention, that just shows like, okay, I want this, and the mom most like that's how she's gonna get it. That's how the infant's gonna get it, as long as they're able to point at it. However, this was beyond that. It's not just mere pointing. It's an infant using their own body language in place of words that they haven't acquired yet. Another example is when an infant could see a cat in the middle, on top of a fence. The infant could just be pointing at the cat, could bring the attention of the mom to the cat, and that way you can see that, okay, that there's a cat there, and they may not know what a cat is, they might not know how to say it. However, that they know that's there, they know it's an animal, so cognitively they know that it's a cat, but they still are yet to be able to produce those words. And if they don't know it's a cat, they still know it's an animal. So similar. but yes, they still don't have the actual capability to actually use words to express that they see the animal right there and on the fence. All right, moving on. I want to continue the discussion by introducing the next prelinguistic gesture, which is called ritualized request gestures. In other words, the infant uses this to attain objects that they want by going up to an adult or an older child sibling and reaching up, raising their arms and with their closing and opening their arms. So as a in a grasping motion, they use this to signify that they want a certain object, whether if it's something that the individual has or something that it's in a certain place, location that they can't reach. That's how they demonstrate that they want it. Um, if they don't get it that way, what they tend to do also is they can also either lead the individual by grabbing that individual's hands and pulling them, guiding them to the object that they want, or they get their arms already and then they actually move them themselves in the direction that they want. One example I've seen in recent years is how children use this ritualized request to gain access to mobile devices. Another example I think of this ritualized request is how children get their parents and then you take them to some candy or some fruit that they see at a table. So those are two examples of how they're used. The last two prelinguistic gestures that facilitate language developments, which I want to talk about, are representational and iconic gestures. These gestural types, accompany early language as a support and as a reinforcement. In other words, representational gestures are used to demonstrate elements attributed to an object in which an infant has no words for. For example, the children use flapping motions to signify flight. In other words, they're trying to mimic a bird. So they have the bird in mind. So they're attributing the element that's associated with the bird. In other words, in this case, it would be the actually moving arms and to represent the wings. The iconic gestures are used to illustrate concrete objects. And in this case, or my example would be how children tend to squeeze their face together to say, "Oh, I'm a fish," to give that fish face, the goldfish face. As infants become toddlers and their language development increases, the use of gestures decreases. While the more iconic or representational gestures decrease in favor of language as they begin using language more often. Toddlers continue using the deictic gestures more frequently as they begin exploring the surroundings. They use deictic gestures in order to increase their word count. They use multiple word utterances to draw attention to certain objects or things. But however, they still keep pointing at those things. They still use this gesture. For example, a child to see something that it's unfamiliar to them, and then they ask, "What's that?" while pointing at the objects. Furthermore, another example as to how children use deictic gestures and multiple word utterances is how they mix it with the language. They could point at a word or an object or something, and they can incorporate an action or they can describe it. For example, a toddler could approach an older person who has a phone, and then they point at it and say it's mine. So what they in their mind is gonna be, oh, that's my phone or my phone. But they just use one word to say, oh, mine. That's all they say. However, since they're pointing at it, that's indicating that whatever they have in their hand is theirs. The final gesture I want to introduce is beat gestures. In this case, it's hand movements that increases stress on what an individual says. We have spoken about this in previous videos, so I won't go too much into detail. But it's just Repeat repetitive hand movements on use whenever someone is trying to get their point across. Continuing on, as children reach preschool age maturity, gestures are no longer limited to just facilitating language. They begin easing other cognitive abilities. For example, one study tested semantic development, and what they did was they asked children to pretend they were to either brush their hair or talk on the phone. What the researchers found was that children did one or two things. They either used their own body to represent that object, or they used an imaginary object, which essentially was just pretending like they had something in their hand. To conclude, the last stage I want to talk about is school age children. In this case, gestures become tools for continual learning. Gestures is used to facilitate mathematics and other functions. That is, gestures becomes a means to lighten the cognitive strain that a child goes through whenever trying to learn something. For example, when learning how to count or use other mathematical skills, children use their hands to actually facilitate that counting, which increases their own performances. I just want to end this video by giving some examples of how we use common gestures in adults and onward. The first one is the shoulder shrug, which essentially just means that you don't really know what something that's being asked of you. The following one I want to say is thumbs up, which generally means that it's something good. At least in Western American culture, it means something good. That it's okay. Furthermore, arms crossed is an indicator that you're on defense, you're defensive or closed, or you disagree with a certain person. The last one is head nodding, which essentially means that you agree and that you agree to go along with another person's choices. With that, this concludes my video on gestures and throughout different developmental stages. Thank you.